Good evening. Hope you had a good week. I don't know if you've been out having a look to see if you could catch a glimpse of the lunar eclipse this evening. As is often the case on our part of the Somerset levels, as the temperature drops, the cloud comes in. And so pretty much as moonrise happened sort of about 20 minutes ago, having had an entire afternoon and early evening of beautiful clear skies, a bank of cloud rolled in. And so I don't know if anybody else around us or nearby managed to catch a glimpse of it, but certainly from where I am, I couldn't see a thing. It's been a weird week for things that trigger religious people. And tonight, if you can give me a little bit of leeway, we're going to have a look at some of the things that have been going on and why they demonstrate just how completely powerless, how pointless religion is by comparison with what we believe God offers, which is personal relationship. Religion is something which has often been the source of great challenge and great aggravation for people that claim to have personal faith. When we talk about what we believe or what we think our relationship to God is, people have a whole lot of baggage. They have the baggage of what they see in the big institutions and the big denominations. And let's be clear, a lot of what they see, they're quite rightly horrified by. But every now and then, it's worth looking at it and realizing just how ridiculous it is, just how far away from what God promises, because it actually highlights one of those fundamentals about the difference between religion and faith. Religion is about how you act and what you think might be true. Faith is about who you trust. Faith is about dependency upon a person. And so faith is much harder to live with. There's a song originally, I think it was written by Steve Taylor, although I prefer some of the covers to his original, but the core of the lyrics is this phrase: it's harder to believe than not to. And the point he's getting at is that actually, if it comes down to simple trust, we're not talking about a complicated system of belief or an extended kind of detailed description of how you think the world works, but trusting in a person, which is the thing that we preach about, the thing that we talk about. Trusting in the person of Jesus actually either works or it doesn't. Either he's true or he's not. Either he's faithful or he isn't. Either he answers prayer or he doesn't. Either he is with you or he's not. Either he speaks or he doesn't. It's a pretty cut and dried thing. And when we say that we believe or trust in Jesus, we're not talking about some systematized religion. What we're talking about is a personal trust. And the evidence of our lives, our experience is that every time we've trusted in him, he's come through for us. Every time we've taken him at his word, it's been shown to be reliable. Every time we've reached out in need, he's heard and he's answered. At the heart of it, that's what we're talking about. But this week, there have been three things, and sadly or strangely enough, a lot of the chat around the lunar eclipse is one of them, that are really showing how powerless religion is. And tonight, although some of the things I'm going to talk about can be grounded in one denomination or another, please understand me, I don't think any denominational religion is the answer. I believe that a personal relationship with Jesus Christ is the only hope. That to know God for yourself and not to know God via some secondhand translator, via some preacher, and that includes anything you might hear from me. I can only tell you what I've experienced, what I believe to be true, what I trust about who Jesus is and who God is. But if you don't experience it for yourself, then there's really no point in listening. Religion is weird, it's problematic, and it's powerless. Faith in Jesus is life. That's what he himself says. He says that true life is to know the only God and to know Jesus, God who came to dwell among us. So here are three weird things that have happened this week. And we're going to frame them all in this contrast: faith in Jesus versus weird, powerless religion. The first one is knowing Jesus and his voice versus weird predictions and unfounded prophecies, such as we've had every single time in my adult life that there's been something like a lunar eclipse or a red moon or a blue moon or some other cosmological thing which was just happening anyway, and people have wanted to attribute some kind of apocalyptic significance to it. Jesus says this about his people. He says, my sheep hear my voice, and they won't listen to anybody else because they know the difference between my voice and a stranger's voice. I call them by name, he says. That's the promise that he gives. And it might be one of the most radical things that I ever say to anybody, but I believe that God speaks. I believe that he speaks personally by his spirit. I believe that he is God. So being all powerful, God can make himself heard. Not only that, but the bigger challenge we sometimes see in our own finiteness, our own inability to comprehend. We say, oh, but how would I know? How would I be sure? Well, the idea that an all-powerful being who never fails can't make himself understood is nonsense. I believe that when God speaks and leads and guides, that we know and that we can understand it and that we can do it, because he not only tells us what to do, but he equips us with what we need to do it, both in terms of our personal attributes being transformed by his presence and also our resources being provided by his goodness. I trust that Jesus speaks. I trust that he speaks to me. I trust that he wants me to understand, so he makes himself understood. And I trust that he wants me to have the opportunity to do it, so he makes me able and gives me what I need to fulfill whatever he says. I believe that he has no favorites. So if he did it for the people that we read about in the Bible, he will also do it for me and for you. Whereas weird religion says, look for a sign and try and interpret it. People who know me know that ever since I had a brief spell during one summer working on a big barge out of Hamburg docks, I have always loved boats. It just got under my skin. Not the sort of sailing that we see with these amazing racing yachts with the flying hulls and all of those things. Just the mechanics of the experience of being on the water, of just being on a boat. And so I've always said one day I'd like to have a boat, but you know, if you're going to dream big. So one of the things that always marks, if I've got a little bit of time off or we're traveling somewhere, is I'll get a copy of one of the journals that talks about the massive super yachts. Now I can't afford a super yacht. I will never probably be able to afford a super yacht. They are just outrageously expensive and probably not the best things for the world for people to be spending all that money on these enormous boats, polluting the environment around them. But anyway, for various reasons, mostly my insomnia, the last few weeks, I've just been occasionally having a look at some much smaller, sort of more attainable boats. Meanwhile, our little lad has been really getting into music by the Lefebvre Quartet. And we put on one of their albums over lunch the other day, and we were just listening to it, and up came the song, and the hook line is, you're going to need a bigger boat. And Liz and I looked at each other and I joked, it's a good job we don't think that God leads us by random weird signs. Because that weird sign would play to what I wanted. It would play to the fact that I'd really like a boat. I'd certainly like a bigger boat than the one I've got, which is a small inflatable dinghy that we push around on the swimming pool. Religion says, try and interpret the signs. And it's very rarely got any more weight to it than staring at the tea leaves or looking at the planets and imagining somehow they influence our lives. It's nonsense. But all through my life, various times, people have said, oh, there was a red moon. What does the red moon mean? In Matthew 24, Jesus talks about people in the last days and how there'll be folks who'll be constantly trying to interpret the signs so that they can hold power over people or claim that they have special knowledge. He says this, if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or there, don't believe them. For false Christs and false prophets will rise and show great signs and wonders to deceive, and if possible, even those that are chosen. See, I have told you beforehand. Therefore, if they say to you, look, he's in the desert, don't go out. Or look, he's in the inner rooms, don't believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. You're not going to find out, but I've given you a promise that you won't miss it. The Bible says to those who look for him, will he come a second time unto salvation? A promise given by the angels to the disciples after the ascension of Christ was, well, it started with a bit of a poking fun at them. You silly men of Galilee, while you're staring up into an empty sky, this same Jesus shall come in the same way you saw him leave. Knowing Jesus and his voice means we won't be prone to being pushed around by interpretation of signs and circumstances and random things that have no control, no power, no influence over us, unless we cede our control to them instead of surrendering ourselves to Jesus, who promises that his sheep hear his voice. Second thing that's gone on this week can be best expressed like this. There is a huge difference between equality before God, which is the gospel, versus the idea that some people have special treatment. I don't know if you saw this week, after a delay caused by the unexpected death of the last pope, a young lad called Carlo, who died at the age of 15, who had run a website in which he documented reports around the world of things that seemed to be miraculous, it has been canonized by the Catholic Church. In order to do that, the Pope had to be convinced that there were two miracles associated with him, and both of them actually are associated with him only after his death. So he has no relationship to them whatsoever. They've not done him any good. He's not experienced them. And let's be clear, for a young man to lose his life to leukemia, which is how he died, it is a tragedy. It is just a tragedy. And however his family are dealing with it, I understand how hard that must be, how difficult. But if you were to believe religion, Anglican religion, Catholic religion, all kinds of different types of religion, there are saints in all sorts of faiths. Islam has saints, and other faiths have gurus, and there's all sorts of ways in which particular people are placed on a pedestal. You would think that God had favorites if you were to listen to that God said, well, these people will get a special experience. These people I will use for miracles, or these people will get to speak in ways that other people won't. There's a hierarchy to it. There always is. When human beings get involved, they always want to put a person between you and God, because then it's easier. When things go wrong, you can blame the person when you might not be quite so willing to say, God, I think that's your fault. And so it provides this distancing, this buffer, but it also gives those people that are in the hierarchy terrifying levels of control. And so one way in which religion has kind of tried to pacify people is say, look, ordinary folks get made saints as well. You know, this 15-year-old boy who had a website and talked about how much fun he liked the old vintage Nintendo games. We're going to turn him into something special, put him on a pedestal, claim that there were miracles associated with him, not just the ones that he posted on his blog. It's not his fault. They didn't do it to him when he had a say in the matter. What the Bible says is that with God, there is no favoritism. In fact, Jesus' little brother James writes in his letter to the church that all discrimination, all favoritism is sin. Preferential treatment of anybody is sin. That God shows no preferential treatment, no partiality is the old kind of theological way of putting it. God doesn't have favorites. And so if you read about something God does for someone else, he'd do it for you too if you ask him. If you read about a relationship someone else has with God and you think that will be an amazing relationship, the only thing stopping you is you, not God. You have that ability to approach him. And so religion has said some people get to be saints. And the biblical, the New Testament word, at least that they take that from, is hagioi. And hagioi literally means ones who are awesome, terrifying by dint of their holiness. It's the same root word from which we get the word hag that we associate with monstrous people. But the reality is this. Every single person who puts their trust in Jesus is made holy. They are consecrated. They are changed. They are set aside for relationship with God. And so the word saint Haggai, as it appears in the New Testament, is used almost every time anyone refers to a gathering of God's people. It's the saints who are there, and the saints who are there and greet the saints and treat the saints well and care for the saints and minister to the saints and provide for the saints and protect the saints and share with the saints. It's just a word universally used for people who trust in Jesus. And it's taken 2,000 years of religion to turn it into something weird that a group of old men in a room that never met the child do to a child after his memory, that gives them some way of leveraging his memory in order to manipulate the opinions of others. All of God's people are saints. And folks who know my mum know that she loves to tell the story where she had cards sitting in her room in her college days which said, from all the saints in either Neath or Knoll or wherever it was that the message was coming from. You have a right to a relationship with Jesus Christ, and that relationship transforms you from death to life, light to darkness, from being helpless to being one for whom God is the ever-present help, from being someone who is just like everyone else to someone who is set aside for God's own delight, holy, sanctified, justified, pure. That is who you are. Awesome. Haggai. And it doesn't come through some complicated means, and it doesn't have to come with proof of this miracle or that miracle, because there is no greater miracle than that God establishes his own dwelling within us. And that brings me to the third thing that's been going on this last week. First Peter 2, Peter writes this about God's people. He says, you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy Haggai nation, his own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, who were once not a people, but are now the people of God, who had not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy. You see, not only are we God's people, not only are we holy because he has made us holy, but we are holy because we are filled with his presence. The third thing we're going to look at is the contrast between being God's dwelling place and all the fuss that's been going on this last week, because it's become clear that the Egyptian government are going to push ahead with their plans to build a massive tourist resort around St. Catherine's Monastery. And for those of you who aren't up on it, St. Catherine's Monastery is a very ancient monastery that was built on the Sinai Peninsula because it was where the Greek Orthodox wanted to convince the world that's where Moses met with God. Now, I think the evidence from Scripture is quite clear. Nobody knows where that happened. Otherwise, they would be foolish enough to create a shrine out of it. Certainly in Jesus' day, nobody knows. And when Jesus has the conversation with a Samaritan woman, she says, you lot say that you should worship God at the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, and we say that this mountain here is where God meets with people. And Jesus doesn't correct her or confirm it. As far as we know, nobody at that time seems to have known anyway. But more importantly, it's irrelevant because Jesus says that those who believe in him become God's dwelling place. God doesn't live in temples made of hands. God isn't on the mountaintop waiting for somebody to find him. Nevertheless, all kinds of people, all kinds of faith, because the site is considered to be where Moses received the Ten Commandments and met with God. And so that story is picked up by lots of different traditions. King Charles has written, because he's horrified, because he's the patron of the charity that raises funds to preserve the documents that are in that monastery. And the Bedouin people in the area are being displaced by a government that doesn't care that the land might not have obvious settlement on it in quite the same way, but it does actually belong to people, and they've lived there for thousands of years, but they're being displaced by this tourist monstrosity. And environmentalists are quite rightly upset about what's happening to what is a pristine desert mountain environment. It's an incredibly rare and precious place in the natural sense. But let's be clear, There is no spiritual significance to a rock, even if it's the right mountain. God is not there anymore. He's not there waiting for someone else to climb up and say, hey, Moses has been gone a bit. Can we do something else up here? Religion says special places. God says, I dwell in people. Religion says you have to go through a particular process and venerate an object that has no life in it. God says, worship me and worship me only. The reality is this, that we are called to be the dwelling place, the temple not built of hands. It is in us that God places his life and his rule and his reign. And so why would we swap a personal experience of the indwelling presence of God